Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of 286 Project with me, Chris Akers. On this podcast, we talk about arts, culture, politics, sport, and anything else we can think of. Now, in regards to that last part, anything else we can think of, I always like inspirational stories, people who push themselves to the limits. And this next guest is certainly someone who does that. His name is known as the Royal Marine. His name is Lee Spencer, and he's here to join us now. Hello, Lee.
Oh yeah, how's it going?
Well, I'm extremely well. So, as I do with at the start of all my episodes, can you tell us a bit about yourself, just briefly, and just quickly how you got to where you're at to at the moment?
Okay, my name's Lee Spencer. I was a Royal Marine for 24 years, and in 2014, my leg unfortunately fell off on the motorway in the M3. I stopped at a scene of an accident and was helping out, and after that, I got the opportunity to join Road to Recovery, which was a military charity, and we formed the first all amputee crew, so the world's first physically disabled crew of four to row any ocean, a world record that inspired me to go on and row the Atlantic solo. And I did that and became the world's first physically disabled person to row the Atlantic solo, from Europe to South America. And also, I got the world's longest ocean row by a physically disabled person. But the biggie is I beat the able-bodied record by 36 days. So I'm the fastest person to row the Atlantic solo and unsupported from Europe to South America.
So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with your upbringing. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, you were born and brought up in Dagenham, I believe. What was your upbringing like?
Yeah, I was born in Dagenham. I suppose you could describe it as fairly difficult. My dad was a violent alcoholic and used to beat me mum and beat me, and my mum would cry for me to help her. And as a very, very young child, a small tot, I would come running in and freeze with fear. So I was petrified of my dad, obviously. And that's really where the Royal Marines comes into it, because I always believed absolutely that I was a coward, and I dreamed of being someone who was brave, someone who was strong, someone who could help their mum. And that's where that my, I suppose, dream, it was a dream to be, or an ambition to be a Royal Marine came from.
So, from one interview I heard that you did. I before you get to the Royal Marines, you did you not take on challenges before that to like almost boost your confidence and prove to yourself that you could do it?
Before I joined the Royal Marines,
Yeah, yeah.
no, I was actually useless at everything. My sport was football, and I didn't make the B team, didn't make the team for school. I played Sunday league football after I left school, and I played for a team over um, Hackney Marshes. I was centre forward for 4 seasons and scored 2 goals. That's how rubbish I am. In fact, I play walking football in the village where I live now, over 50s walking football. And in my first game with one leg, I scored a hat trick. So I'm the only person to get better at football, having lost their leg. So that's how unsporty I was as a kid. So it really was a dream. In fact, when you take your uh, options at school, I think it's aged 13.
Yeah.
I went up to they had like a small careers fair at my school, and I went up to the Royal Marine recruiting sergeant and said, I want to join the Marines when I leave. And he asked me, are you in you captain of the football team? I said, no. He said, you in the football team? I said, no. He said, are you in the rugby team? We didn't play rugby at my school. And he said, you're not what we're looking for. So when I said it was less ambition, more a dream to be in the Marines.
So, how old were you when you first tried for the Marines?
When I left school and actually went to the careers office, I was 18. and I was interviewed by Chief Petty Officer Smith, who's a name emblazoned on my memory. It was in Holborn in London. And I didn't get past the interview stage. He said those exact same words, "You're not what we're looking for." And it wasn't until I left the job I was doing, which I hated, and then went to the careers office again. Was interviewed by a colour sergeant. I think his name was Curly, if my memory serves straight. And I got past the interview, and then got loaded onto a potential recruits course, which is a 4-day, 3-night selection down at Lympstone in Devon, where at the Commando Training Centre. And luckily, I was one of only about a third who passed that selection and got a place in training.
For those, obviously, people that would have heard of the Royal Marines, but they probably don't have an idea of what the training is like, can you just describe the typical training regime of the Royal Marines? Because I imagine if people hear it, they might be astounded by what you achieved.
Well, quite difficult. You could probably do about 8 podcasts just on that. It's the longest and widely regarded the hardest basic military course in the Western world.
Mhm.
That's a fact. The Royal Marines make up about 5% of UK defence, but around 50% of UK badged special forces operators or soldiers are Royal Marines. So we punch way above our weight, and the training um, obviously works. It's I would imagine a lot of people uh, could picture a lot of shouting, screaming. It's very much about self-motivation. Everything you've done in training is right, do this. And if you don't want to do it, the door's over there. We're not going to shout at you and scream at you to do it. It's very much about self-motivation. The Royal Marines train very differently to the rest of the armed forces.
Yeah. So you in the Royal Marines, was it at this time as well that you, because I heard somewhere you tried the Three Peaks, which is special to my heart because I did it 10 years ago. Didn't you try the Three Peaks while you're in the Royal Marines as well? Another challenges, or was that later?
No, that was it last year? Last year. Done the
Oh,
3 peaks before, but not in 24 hours. As training for something um that I'm going to try again next year. It's a triathlon that no one's ever done before. So it's swim the channel, cycle Land's End to John O'Groats and do the 3 peaks, but as one big challenge. No one's ever done it before. So I've done the actual 3 peaks, one after the other on consecutive days. Not last year, year before. And last year I attempted the triathlon of Great Britain, but unfortunately I didn't get across the channel. But I carried on with it anyway, and I cycled from Land's End to Snowdon, got up and down Snowdon, and then cycled to Scarfell Pike, got up and down Scarfell Pike. But by then my stump, where my prosthetic attaches to my stump, that had just worn down to nothing. It was just basically raw flesh, and that caused the stump to swell, which meant I had difficulty getting my prosthetic on. And when you can't get your leg on, you can't really go any
yeah,
further.
yeah, yeah.
But I booked in for another attempt at the channel next year.
Yeah. No, like I said, the Three Peaks is close to my heart because I tried it, say, 10 years ago, the 24 hours, and I know how difficult it is. So anyone who can do it, have my utmost respect.
I wouldn't be able to. I don't think doing it in 24 hours is achievable for me. It's coming down off my. Actually, it's not the fact that I've only got one leg that's the difficulty. My other leg, the leg that I actually have got at the knee, when I was initially lost my leg, it was completely dislocated at the knee, and it only bends to about roughly 90 degrees. So coming down, stepping
Yeah.
down is really, really difficult. And on the bend, the first part of the path that goes up to the lock or the little tarn, and
Mhm.
where you cross over and then start zigzagging up the main part of the mountain, that first part coming down off that just takes me forever. Nearly every one of those little steps is about an inch to 2 inches, out of the range of my left leg, so I can't step down them. I have to kind of turn round and come down it backwards, which really, really slows me down.
Yeah, yeah. No, like I said, any respect to who even tries that because I don't know how hard it is. But going back to the Royal Marines, so obviously you said I think it was 24 years there.
Yeah.
What was it? You done 3 tours of Afghanistan? Can you just explain what that was like?
Um, yeah, probably the same as everybody else's experience of Afghanistan um, at the time. I I actually volunteered for something called Special Duties, which isn't the SAS or SBS, that's Special Forces. Just want to make that clear. But I done a very specialist job out in Afghanistan, and yeah, at the 3 tours, the middle one in 2010 was probably the most kinetic. Yeah, well, it was war, so it was everything you'd expect.
Yeah, indeed. And then we come to the day where you had the accident in which you lost your leg. Can you just describe how that happened and basically the kind of what happened after that?
Yeah, I was traveling back to work after Christmas leave, so it was a Sunday evening, horrible stormy January evening, and I got to the M3 motorway and I came across a car that had crashed into the central reservation. I immediately pulled over, and the people that were in the vehicle, they were out and they were on the hard shoulder, so I made sure there was no one left in the vehicle, obviously. And then another car, I was checking them over, making sure that they were okay. So at the time, I'd done 3 tours of Afghan, 1 tour of Iraq, so I was a fairly competent first aider with all the training that you get before you go out there. So I was checking them over, making sure that they were okay. When another car crashed into theirs, and its engine and gearbox came flying out, and that's what hit me. Nearly a ton of metal knocked me about 15, 20 meters over the barrier onto the grass verge on the other side of the hard shoulder. Took my right leg off below the knee, completely dislocated my left leg at the knee. And I was bleeding to death, very, very nearly died. But luckily, my guardian angel, a Rastafarian from Hackney called Frank, happened to come along and he saved my life. I asked him, he came along and says, "Is there anything I can do?" So I said, "Yeah, I need a tourniquet now." So he whipped his belt off, got it round my leg, but we couldn't get it tight enough to stop the bleeding. But I got his daughter. Luckily, he had his daughter Zanelli with him, and I got Zanelli to stand on me groin and put all of her weight on the femoral artery, and that stopped the bleeding. And if Frank hadn't come along, I wouldn't be here now. I was. We waited there for about half an hour for the ambulance, so I would have. I was close to bleeding out when he came along.
Mhm.
Um,
How much
and
blood did you
then
lose?
I'd lost over half my body's blood. I later found out. I'd lost so much that when the ambulance came, they couldn't move me. They had to fly. Um, and it was critical. They got blood into me ASAP. So they actually flew a blood substitute out and gave me a transfusion there on the M6.
Gosh, I mean,
M6, sorry, the M3.
I mean, I can't imagine what that was like or even what that looks like. I mean, that was it's because it sounds to me, was it one of those? I know it sounds cliche, but was it something that went in slow motion, or just something that very, very quickly?
Um, Bits of it went in slow motion. When I was initially hit, I heard a bang and lots of screaming, lots of noise, and I felt me almost simultaneously felt myself hit, and I could feel myself moving through the air. And I kept telling myself, I knew something bad had happened. I kept telling myself, when this movement stops, you've got to check yourself over. And in my memory, probably got about 4 or 5 minutes worth of thinking that could
Mhm.
only have been a couple of seconds in reality. So that slowed down. But um, when it when I saw that my leg had gone, I knew instantly that the fact that it had gone wasn't really that important. I had to stop the bleed. I knew I had between 7 and 12 minutes to stop it. Otherwise, I'd have bled to death.
Gosh. Incredible. And they flew you to they had to, obviously they gave you a blood substitute and then they flew you out to a hospital.
Yeah, flew me to St George's Hospital in Tooting in South London.
How long were you in hospital for before you recovered?
About 5, 6 weeks, and I think I had about 7 operations. I had to have a massive operation to reattach all the ligaments. So every single ligament that attaches the bottom part of your leg to the top part of the knee, every single one of them had been destroyed. So I had to have a massive operation on my left leg, but they couldn't do that until I had a lot of infection in the stump, or what was left,
Mm.
excuse me, what was left of my right leg. So I was fighting the infection there, which was really critical because they were talking about amputating further up and going through the knee, which is another level of disability. So that was a close run thing. So that's why I was there really for 5 weeks. And then I was discharged, and my house was described by the occupational therapist as the most disabled, unfriendly house she'd ever encountered. But luckily, the Royal Marines Rehabilitation Company, which is a hunter company, they had Help for Heroes as well as the Royal Marines Charity had built purpose-built family accommodation that me and my wife moved into whilst I recovered before started the journey to getting a leg again.
So you've recovered. What did you, after you've recovered, what were your first thoughts in regards to what were you going to do for the rest of your life?
I had no idea. Every single competency I had revolved around having a fit, strong, and healthy body. And I had no idea what I could do. I uh, panicked and enrolled in a open university course. I thought probably I could be a teacher, maybe. Um, but I started. Um, I I got into doing charity events really. I suppose a couple of years before I lost my leg. I rescued a puppy in Afghanistan, bizarrely, and it was this tiny little puppy. It was starving, and it was nothing more than a natural human reaction. It was stuck between two fences, so I grabbed it. And where I was working at the time, everyone was like, "Great, we've got a pet dog," and I got lumbered looking after it. And my cousin told me about a charity called Now's That Dogs that brought dogs back for people who were serving, and they brought the dog back. She became our family pet. She was called Hannah, and I asked if there was anything I could do, and he suggested um, perhaps doing a charity event. As I said before, that I wasn't someone who would describe themselves in any shape or form as physically gifted. I kept my head above water physically wise within the Royal Marines with a lot of training. I worked hard. I worked a lot harder than everybody else to maintain good basic fitness within the Marines. So I would never consider myself someone who was exceptionally gifted physically. So it was something that was completely out of nowhere near my radar. But once I'd done one, I think it was a cycling sportive around Exmoor, and I got the bug. And then 6 months before I lost my leg, I'd done some more. I ran a marathon over Dartmoor. And 6 months before I lost my leg, myself and a group of former servicemen, Royal Marines in the village I live in, we raised £20,000 by me doing a double marathon. So I ran 52 miles over Dartmoor for a young Marine who had been paralysed. So when I had when I woke up with one leg in the hospital, that path there had already been trodden. So I set myself a goal of raising £10,000 for the Royal Marines charity in my first year with one leg. And so although I had no idea what I was going to do for a job once I was medically discharged, I tried a phased return to work and see if I could really still do a job, but restricted to a desk job. But it it wasn't, I wasn't really physically capable to do every aspect of that job. So it didn't feel right, didn't sit right with me that I'd be being paid the same as someone, but not doing the same as them.
Mhm.
Uh, so although I didn't really have an idea of what I was going to do once I left the Marines, or what I could do, in fact, the doing charity events kind of took off, and sort of had a little bit of a life of its own. One thing led to another, and ended up rowing, being part of the first physically disabled crew of 4 to row an ocean.
That's the next thing I was going to ask you, because I'd read about that on your website. How did that come about, and how did you manage to organize that? And actually, had you rowed before, and had the others rowed before or not, or how did that
Um,
all together?
well, my first day at Headley Court, when I first went there, in the bed opposite me, there was this lad who he had no legs, but he had a massive big beard, which is unusual and stands out in the military. So I asked him about the beard, and he said, I've just come back from rowing the Atlantic. He'd rowed as part of a team with Road to Recovery, where it was 2 able-bodied and 2 physically disabled guys.
Hmm.
And that we became firm friends over a year of me learning to walk and through rehabilitation. And then at the end of my first year as a amputee, I got an email asking for volunteers to put together the world's first all amputee crew. And I'd never rowed before, never been in to sea in a small boat like that, or anything remotely like it before. But I thought, why not? So I volunteered for it, went through a bit of a selection process, and at the end of it, I was named a member of the team. And Cal, who was the guy with no legs and the big beard, who was in the bed opposite me, he skippered us across.
Okay, okay. So, how many days did it take you to do that particular
Yeah.
challenge?
So the first row took us 46 days, via the strongest Atlantic hurricane in 61 years and the earliest Atlantic hurricane in 78 years. They're genuinely that lucky. We got caught by Hurricane Alex halfway across. So I've been in a rowing boat in the middle of the Atlantic in a hurricane.
How did how did you navigate that? Because I'll be honest, if that was me, I'd be shit scared. Let's be blunt about it. So how on earth did you?
You
Or,
put out a thing called a power anchor, so it's just like a big parachute that hooks you in the sea. Firstly, it stops you getting blown back the way you came,
Mhm.
which is dead handy. But also it keeps you in the most stable position, facing into the worst of the wind and waves. And actually, it was okay. It was fairly stable, and it was a 3-day rest from rowing. We was rowing 2 hours on, 2 hours off, non-stop, 24 hours a day, and that was for 46 days. So it was fairly tiring.
I imagine before that you had to do a lot of training beforehand, like building up your arms, learning.
Not
Not at
not
all.
really. No,
Okay,
no.
okay.
First time we got in the boat was out in La Gomera in the Canaries before we set off. It would have been handy if we could have had some training. But when training for rowing an ocean is quite an odd thing to do. There's not really anything that compares to it, and there's not anything that you can really do to prepare yourself for it. And actually, the only way or the best way for training for rowing across an ocean is to get fat and strong.
Yeah, yeah. Oh gosh, okay. And then what was the next challenge you did after that? Because that's an achievement in itself. So when did you start playing the next challenge, and when and what it was
Well, I
that?
saw an opportunity. I thought I'd probably have about another 18 months, a year, 18 months if I was lucky. still in the Marines, still being paid by the Marines. So I thought I had an opportunity. I knew how to row an ocean, so I'd just done it. I knew the way. So I thought, these opportunities don't come round that often, so I'd row it solo. So I then put together the next row, which was instead of from the Canaries to the Caribbean, went a little bit further. Went from the Portugal, Porto Mayo, in the southern tip of Portugal, and I rowed right across the Atlantic to Cayenne in French Guiana in South America, and that was completely solo and unsupported, completely on my own.
That's incredible. And again, I imagine that length of time. Didn't you break records when doing that as well? Are you in the Guinness Book of World Records?
Yeah, yeah. So the record for rowing across the Atlantic, the entire Atlantic from Europe to South America, was 96 days, 12 hours and 45 minutes. And it was held by a Norwegian called Steinhoff. He done it in 2002. That's when he broke the record. And he was the third person in history to do that route. And so when I done it, I was the fourth person in history to do it, but I was the fastest. I done it in 60 days, 16 hours and 6 minutes, which is still the record. So I beat his record. So I beat the able-bodied record by 36 days.
Gosh, I mean, again, much respect to you for doing that because it was like a challenge. But if that was me, I don't know how I would cope with that, to be honest. And actually, that comes on to another question. When you when you first started doing these challenges, and you told your friends and family this was what I was going to do, I imagine they were supportive, but were there some, I don't know, odd looks to think, oh, okay, what are you actually doing here? Or
Well,
was
you
just
got to remember that, like me and my wife, we've been together since I was 16, so 38 years this year, I think. So she's been through training. Well, we've been through training, 24 and a half years in the Marines, 3 tours of Afghanistan, tour of Iraq, Northern Ireland. So actually, probably rowing across the Atlantic wasn't up there with the most stressful, dangerous things that I've done.
what is the most
It's
stressful
part,
activity?
yeah, it's part of our life, really. It's just normal for us.
What you say about stress? What's the most stressful challenge that you have done?
Well, not challenged, but the most stressful thing I've done was probably the Afghan tour in 2010. That was the bloodiest year of our time in Afghanistan. So there was lots of British servicemen and women getting killed.
Gosh,
I
gosh.
lost a lot of friends that year as well.
Yeah, that really sad.
So, so when you put it in context, actually rowing across the Atlantic ain't really that stressful for the family.
Yeah. Just go back to, because again, I read on your website about the triathlon of Great Britain. So you did the three, well, obviously Three Peaks is part of that. Can you just explain the other two sections as well with regards to that?
Well, swim the channel. So I had the idea actually whilst I was in intensive care and on a lot of drugs, which probably explains where the idea came from. Because I was thinking about what to do next, and I thought, if you ain't got any legs, you don't really need legs to swim. So perhaps I could swim. So I thought about, well, the ultimate swim in Britain is the Channel, isn't it?
Mm,
And I started thinking about that. And then I started thinking about cycling. I might be able to cycle, maybe. And then I thought about the ultimate cycling challenge in Britain is Land's End to John O'Groats. And then I had a little bit of a light bulb moment. I thought, well, that's 2/3 of a triathlon. And the ultimate, I suppose, walking, running challenge in Britain is the Three Peaks.
mm.
So I thought that's a triathlon. I looked into it. No one's done it back to back as a triathlon. So that's where I got the idea. Then rowing actually got in the way for a few years. And then last year, was it last year? I've lost the year. It's lockdown, isn't it? And getting old. Time flies when you're old, doesn't it? Yeah, so I don't think it was last year. I think it was the year before I attempted it. But unfortunately, I didn't get across the channel. which is really the trickiest part of it. The cycling, everything else, you know you're going to do. It's just how long it takes you. But with the channel, there's so many variables with the tides, currents, and also the French port authorities. If you get if the current takes you into a one of the shipping lanes close to the port of Calais, they pull you out. There's nothing you can do about it. They stop the road there, stop the swim there and then. So it's really quite a difficult thing to do. And but I'm booked in again, so I'm going to have another attempt at it in next year. So if I get across the channel, then I'll carry on and carry on with the triathlon. Get
Okay.
myself to Land's End as quickly as I can and start cycling to John O'Groats.
Gosh, yeah. So how is that planned then? So you'll swim or do each one with like a gap in between, like a rest, or how would it?
No, straight back to back. So ideally it'd be swim from France to Dover,
Yeah.
right, from Calais to Dover, but you can't do that. The French won't let you do that. So you'd have to swim I've got to swim from Dover to across to Calais, then get back and to Land's End as quickly as possible, cycle to John O'Groats, then get down to Ben Nevis as quickly as possible, and then do the Three Peaks.
Gosh, incredible. And again, going on your website when I was trying to do research for the interview, there's something on here you've posted which says, dare to dream, and if you don't fail, you're not dreaming big enough. Is that more or less the way you live life now in terms of just try, and if you don't try, then yeah, or if you haven't don't try,
It's
then you keep down.
I'm lucky enough. Um, yeah, it's weird how this came about. When my leg fell off, as I said, I had no idea of what I could do for a job or what I was going to do for the rest of my life. But I started getting asked by schools to come in and present prizes at prize giving evenings. Why having one leg qualifies you to do that, I still don't know. But they would ask me to say a few words, and then inevitably they'd ask me to come back and speak to the whole school at an assembly, and that one thing led to another. Um, I now have a career as a after dinner speaker, inspirational, motivational speaker, and I also get the opportunities. I speak in state schools to kids for free as a matter of principle. So I don't want to ever be paid for it because it's a passion. I don't want it to be a job. And I get the chance to tell kids what I wish someone had told me. And that's that, failing. And it's more pertinent today. It's about the importance of failing, about the importance of trying. And the more you try, you're prone to failing. And actually, everyone fails. All of us fail at some point in our lives to a lesser or greater degree. And the problem now, I think, kids have got it way worse than what I certainly had it, and my generation is social media is such a big part of how they live their lives and how, excuse me, how ingrained it is, and it's really their reality in a very big way. But it's so false, and no one puts failures on social media. It's all, look how great I am, look
Yeah.
at my great house, look at my family, look at my successful this, my success, look at how great our holiday is. And you've even got filters that just change people's appearances, and that's their reality. And that's, any failure is so much harder now for children that it's being able to go in and tell them that not only is it okay to fail, you should try and fail, because that's the reasoning behind that statement, dare to dream, and if you don't fail, you're not dreaming big enough. It's really that. Have a dream that's so big, so ambitious, that if you don't fail, then it's not big enough. Get a bigger dream.
Yeah.
Actually plan to fail in that sense. And it really is a privilege that I get to be able to do that. I love doing it.
So leading on to part of what you just said in that answer, do you think you said it's harder for children now from when you were growing up? possibly even when I was growing up. So therefore, do you think children are less risk averse now because it's almost like a safety culture, or is that me
No,
just?
no, 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 nothing like that. No, I ain't. In fact, I've got a real bee in my bonnet about this hate of woke. That I even hate the word woke. It used to be manners. When people called it manners, not wanting to offend someone wasn't seen as a bad thing. But all of a sudden, everybody, it is a bad thing not wanting to offend someone. And this whole thing about snowflakes and kids these days, and it's generally spouted off is probably a good way of describing it, by miserable middle-aged people like me who had everything when we grew up. We had a functioning NHS, we had jobs, you could actually get a job and leave home. You could, and if you were relatively successful, you could buy a house. Kids haven't got that now. What hopes do they have? And the whole thing about social media, that's where they live, that's their reality. Kids socialize online now. I think probably our psychology, our brains haven't caught up with the pace of how that's overtaken the way we live our lives. And it causes a lot of problems. And one of those problems is that children, they don't see life in the reality as the reality that we did. They see life through filters on Snapchat and Facebook, and dealing with that is so much harder. And I don't think it's got anything at all to do with children's robustness. People don't change. We haven't changed fundamentally from our granddads who fought in the Second World War and our great granddads who fought in the First World War. There's no difference fundamentally in us, physically or psychologically. And when people talk about kids nowadays, and often spoken that they're not as robust as we were, I think that's a complete nonsense. I think it's far more difficult for them nowadays. Nothing to do with them, but to do with the circumstances they find themselves in.
Yeah. So okay. So leading on to that point, would you say then that yes, people in your generation, like any generation, they worked hard, but there was almost not a guarantee, but there's likelihood that you work hard, you could get the house, you could get the car, you could get a decent pension, just what I mean. Whereas now, I mean, trying to afford a house, for instance, by yourself is just nigh impossible. Do you understand what I mean? Is that what you're saying? Is that
Yeah, but not getting into politics, but
yeah?
it is. That's a fact. I don't think it's politics. It is a fact that, you know, options and outcomes for children are so much less. My daughter was a nurse, and she had to get into over £30,000 worth of debt to train to be a nurse. Never had to do that when we were kids. When we were kids, if you were clever enough, university was free. Imagine that.
Mm,
Our generation. Imagine telling kids nowadays that if you were clever enough and you earned a place for university, it was free.
mm,
That would blow their minds. Kids nowadays come out of university with over £50,000 worth of debt. How can
mm.
you start your life £50,000 in debt? It's in almost every way imaginable, life is a lot more difficult for our children.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I completely agree. And I like people speaking to people like you on this podcast who are very inspirational and saying, always try and so on. I find great joy in interviewing. And it gets on to like the last question, which is, what are your plans for later? I know you talked about triathlon of Great Britain, but are there any challenges that you thought of which you haven't done yet, but you would like to, or anything
Well,
like that?
actually, I'm planning, I'm about to launch and go live tomorrow on my next challenge, which is Row for Ukraine. So myself, so it's a joint crew of wounded and injured British servicemen and Ukrainian servicemen. We're going to row across the Atlantic from Gran Canaria to Barbados, and we're doing that in December. So that's getting launched tomorrow morning. So whenever you're listening to this podcast, Friday the whatever tomorrow is, I
Friday
can't.
16th.
Yeah, Friday the 16th. So, and the reason we're doing that, I got asked by a boat builder actually, who's been part of the scene, ocean rowing scene in Britain for about 20 odd years. So I've met him and spoken to him before. He's Ukrainian, and he was inspired by my first row with Road to Recovery, where we were 4 wounded, injured servicemen. He wanted to do something similar for Ukraine. And I thought about it. And then, having said I'd never row again, I've talked myself into putting this row together. So I'll be leading us. We'll be rowing 2 British servicemen. So it'll be myself and another former Royal Marine who's actually a beefeater at the Tower of London. But he's got multiple sclerosis, and we've got 3 Ukrainians. So we've got 1 reserve, and they're all wounded, injured servicemen. They were injured fighting. And the reason behind it, and this is the most important thing, there's always got to be a reason, otherwise you're just doing things for doing them's sake, is I want to draw attention to the human cost for what the Ukrainians are doing. Actually, they're, again, not wanting to get into politics, they're actually fighting a war that we can't, without escalating into potentially World War III.
Mm-hmm.
And we're supporting them as we should, I believe, with logistics, with weapons and ammunition and training. But there's a human cost to that fighting. And that's what I want to draw attention to, is the human cost. And we'll be raising money for, the money will go directly to the Invictus Games Foundation, but ring-fenced for Ukrainian wounded and injured servicemen and women's rehabilitation. So that's what we're raising money for. So that goes live tomorrow. We'll be the Ukrainians will be coming over in late August, September for a month's training. And then in November, we'll go out to Gran Canaria to start rowing in December. So not much time.
I mean, fantastic. And I really hope you and the rest of your team do well on that. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'll leave, because this will be on YouTube, so I'll leave a link to your website in the description below. Lee Spencer, Royal Marine, thank you so much for being on 286 Project.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. Take care.
Cheers.